The Pre-Raphaelite label has communicated a wide range of ideas since its invention almost 175 years ago. Today, we see it used in reference to a realist study of nature or in relation to an artwork based on an Arthurian narrative. And we even see it used as an instructional term for hair and makeup styling within the world of high fashion at the moment. This array of applications is not a new phenomenon. Over the course of the second half of the 19th century, the label was so prolific and invoked in such a wide range of forms that one writer comically argued that there were now Pre-Raphaelite window curtains, chairs, tables, knives, and forks. But in order for us to understand the scope of the term's evolution or evolutions, it's important that we closely analyse its origins and consider what the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, aka the PRB, meant to be communicated by its name and how it reflected their revolutionary intentions. Now, this is quite a large topic. It certainly takes up a significant part of my PhD thesis. So my paper today is specifically focused on the temporal complexity of the name and its relationship to periodized art history, whilst also considering the group's alertness to this quality through the examination of early PRB artworks as case studies. The Pre-Raphaelites' relationship to the past has been explored in depth by a variety of scholars. However, specific analysis of the label's use of temporal anchors has received limited investigation thus far. So let's launch straight in and begin by looking at the structure of the term and the meaning that was written into it. The prefix pre simply means before something. But the term Raphaelite is really important to grasp, and a lot of previous scholarly work on this movement, as well as contemporary responses to the name in journals and newspapers at the time, have often missed the didactic role of the suffix. As outlined in the Oxford English Dictionary, "ite" denotes a disciple, follower, or adherent of a person or doctrine. These have a tendency to be deprecatory, being mostly given by opponents, and seldom acknowledged by those to whom they are applied. So, in the PRB's adoption of this label, the "ite" suffix plays an imperative role in its communication of meaning. It is not so much that the group wished to look to the work that predated Raphael himself, but more that they wished to return to a time before his followers. This was explicitly pointed out by William Holman Hunt, one of the PRB founders, in 1905, when he stated, "Pre-Raphaelitism is not pre-Raphaelism. Raphael in his prime was an artist of the most independent and daring course as to conventions. There is no need here to trace any failure in Raphael's career, but the prodigality of his productiveness and his training of many assistants compelled him to lay down rules and manners of work, and his followers, even before they were left alone, accentuated his poses into postures. The master himself, at the last, was not exempt from furnishing examples of such conventionalities. Whoever were the transgressors, the artists who thus severely travestied this prince of painters at his prime were Raphaelites." So, in their name, the PRB declared that they wished to return to a time before this mannerized approach to form. It is important to quickly note here, though, that the group did not necessarily want to imitate the art that came before Raphael's followers, but rather to invoke the spirit of these earlier works. But that is not to say they did not still borrow particular elements from these images for their own designs, as we will be exploring shortly. This leads to the question of why the group might have chosen to cast a spotlight on Raphael specifically here, as the central reference point in their name. Well, it's perhaps unsurprising given the reverence in which the artist was held in the 18th and 19th centuries. Sir Joshua Reynolds, for example, frequently praised his work. In his 5th Discourse on Art, he stated that Raphael stands in general foremost of the first painters, with Michelangelo claiming the next attention within the hierarchy of great artists. And the isolation of Raphael as the height of artistic development was a belief carried through to the 19th century. The art historian Anna Jameson, for example, argued that in the history of Italian art, he stands alone, like Shakespeare in the history of our literature, and he takes the same kind of rank, a superiority not merely of degree, but of quality. She also remarked upon the influence of his work, stating that everywhere in art we find his traces, and, like Reynolds, she too ranked Raphael as the greatest artist amongst his contemporaries. We also have, just ahead of the PRB's formation in the autumn of 1848, Charles Robert Leslie, who was Professor of Painting at the Royal Academy at this time, who had praised Raphael for his imagination and extraordinary dramatic power, and had noted that the artist was currently placed nearer to the hearts of men than any other painter that ever lived. These examples are reflective of the artistic establishment's positioning of Raphael at the pinnacle of artistic creation. The group's comprehension of this was explicitly referenced by Holman Hunt when he was describing the creation of the group's name in an article in 1886, where he stated that it was in a little spirit of fun that we thus agreed that Raphael, the prince of painters, was the inspiring influence of the art of the day. We can also see this structuring around Raphael embedded within the mid-19th century periodization of art history. As noted by Elizabeth Pretchon, Charles Robert Leslie's lectures at this time implied a simple binary division between early art, before 1500, and everything after that date, from the generation of Raphael and Michelangelo onwards. Now, this division was not absolute. For example, Francia was placed among the medieval painters by enthusiasts for early art, in spite of notable works such as this altarpiece possessing the date of 1510 to 1512. Instead of using the year 1500 as a tool to definitively place specific works of art into the category of either medieval or what would later become known as, for instance, High Renaissance, it was used to help categorize artists into a particular stylistic generation, with many commentators possessing a polarized opinion towards the work from each side of this tipping point. The identification of the year 1500 for this moment of change may have been the result of a certain sense of numerical satisfaction and neatness in its centering within the second millennium CE. The comprehension of an artistic generational shift centered around this year, interestingly, also ties into this idea of the art historical centering of Raphael, as his lifespan almost exactly centers upon the year 1500, thus lending a heightened sense of numerical symmetry to this division of artistic generations. It can therefore be argued that Raphael's career represented a point of definitive generational artistic change within art history. And this understanding was then reflected in the Pre-Raphaelites' construction of their name. The use of the generic pre to refer to art that preceded the followers of Raphael, where we had this idea of a before and an after point in time, further illustrates an understanding of this binary divide that was outlined by Leslie. This, combined with the name's reference and literal centering of Raphael in its linguistic construction, can therefore be interpreted as an explicit acknowledgement of the group's understanding of the contemporary view of periodized art history. This brings us to consider how this alertness to the construction of time written into the group's name was visually communicated in PRB artworks. We begin with this painting on the left by John Everett Millais from circa 1850 of Eliza Wyatt and her daughter Sarah, commissioned by her father-in-law, James Wyatt Sr., as a pendant to the painting shown here on the right. Now, this certainly isn't one of the more famous Pre-Raphaelite artworks, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's not very familiar to many of you. I propose, though, that it's actually one of the most important early works from this movement, as it provides potentially the most explicit visual articulation of the Pre-Raphaelite label. I'm certainly not the first to take note of this painting's apparent communication of the PRB's aims. As observed by Paul Barlow, this painting, along with its companion portrait, are virtually manifestos of Pre-Raphaelitism. However, thus far, there hasn't been a close reading of this painting specifically in relation to its visual depiction of the Pre-Raphaelite name and its relationship to questions of periodization and temporality. Now, upon first look, this might not look like a very successful portrait. After all, the pair have this really stiff posture and Eliza Wyatt seems very emotionally disengaged from her daughter. But Millais has actually posed them in this way on purpose. The clue is in his rendering of the images on display on the back wall, showing prints after Raphael's Madonna della Sedia, which is on the left, Leonardo's The Last Supper, which is in the center, and Raphael's Alba Madonna, which is on the right. By copying these works, in particular these Madonna and Child images by Raphael, Millais lets us know that he could paint Eliza and her daughter in this same intimate and soft posture as Raphael's works if he wanted to. Instead, Millais recalls the stiff postures of early Italian artworks. In the summer of 1848, just before the formation of the PRB, the National Gallery had acquired 2 panels from the San Benedetto altarpiece depicting a collection of adoring saints painted by Lorenzo Monaco in 1407 to 1409, but attributed to Taddeo Gaddi at this time. A good deal of attention has been paid to the influence of the 2 panels on the PRB's artworks that they exhibited in 1849, but less consideration has been directed towards their possible influence on this painting. For example, the passive expression and 3/4 view of Eliza's face is recalled by figures such as St. Stephen in the green here, whilst the frozen outward gesture of her arm does bear a similarity to the pose of St. John the Baptist in pink. Scholars have also suggested that early Flemish portraits might also have been a source for Millais' design of this work. For example, he was very familiar with Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait in the National Gallery. Indeed, his posing of Eliza and Sarah may have been influenced by the mirrored three-quarter turn of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife in Van Eyck's image. It's also been suggested that Eliza's seated pose, and particularly the stiff outstretched hand, recall early pictures of the Madonna and Child in the tradition of Cimabue. I argue, however, that this position might also, or instead, more legibly be read as a prayer-like gesture. Combined with her near profile pose, Eliza takes on the appearance of a donor figure from an altarpiece. In this regard, it's very possible that Millet cited Bernard's Costumes Historiques and its illustration of Beatrice d'Este, derived from the Sforza altarpiece from 1494, in which the figure is shown kneeling in profile with her flat hands clasped rigidly together. She even has a somewhat similar style of hair. It may be that all or maybe only some of these sources were actually considered by Millet when he designed this portrait. However, what cannot be denied is that he depicted Eliza and Sarah Wyatt in a distinctly archaic manner that stands in stark contrast with the softness and intimacy of the Raphael prints on the wall. As a result, Millet appears to be communicating a narrative within his portrait of these two modern figures, where he seems to be saying that this is what the art of today should look like. Forget all that work by Raphael and his followers. This somewhat comic, somewhat serious message is further indicated by the way Millet has rendered the expression of the Virgin in the print of Raphael's Madonna della Sedia. Instead of depicting the Virgin softly smiling, as in Raphael's painting, Millet has given her an almost glaring or frowning expression, as if to say that Raphael, or the engraver, disapproves of Millet's stiff postures. It's through this detail and the acknowledgement of the variety of early Italian art references written into the pair's postures that the deeper meaning and relevance of the print's placement within the composition becomes clear. The exaggerated early Renaissance postures of the pair are the dominant focus of the painting, and so they represent the pre in the group's name. The prints after Raphael on the wall, produced by an engraver who has literally followed the hand of Raphael, serve as an explicit illustration of the Raphaelite. Millet's placement of the pre-element in front of the Raphaelite, which has been pushed to the back of the scene here, indicates his hierarchical ranking of these artistic periods. It's also important to recognise that the pre-element is embodied by contemporary figures in a contemporary space. This creates an impression of Millet wishing to declare that the art of 1850, embodied by Eliza and her daughter here, should reflect the manner and spirit of earlier art. This evocation of the PRB's manifesto surely cannot be a coincidence. This consideration of the painting as a visual representation of both the group's name and Pre-Raphaelitism itself can be taken even further. The PRB wanted to put modern art back on track by encouraging a return to the spirit of a purer artistic time. Millet declares this intention by placing Sarah in the centre of the composition, and even on a pedestal of sorts, where she stands as a physical manifestation of a new generation in a modern era who is being reared in a rigid manner akin to the art before the time of the Raphaelites. The other case study I would like to highlight today is Millet's painting Isabella, which was produced in 1848 to 1849 and was the first painting that the artist exhibited as part of the newly formed PRB. As stated earlier, right before the group's formation, the National Gallery had acquired two panels painted by Lorenzo Monaco. You can see the direct influence of the right panel on early PRB artworks such as Rossetti's Girlhood of Mary Virgin, where the artist has borrowed the posing of these saints from Lorenzo's image for his depiction of the Virgin Mary and Saint Anne. You can also see Millet borrowing the same element for his posing of Lorenzo and Isabella. There's also a similar play with the opposing direction of the figure's gaze in both paintings, plus the slightly odd perspective and placement of figures in Millet's painting somewhat echoed the stacked arrangement of Lorenzo's saints. Through reference to a work of art that predates Raphael's followers, both Rossetti and Millet have subtly written a literal pre-Raphaelite practice into their works. And so, through this citation alone, we see a suggestion of the artist's communication of their group's name. This sense of consciously referencing the group's name also appears to be suggested by the objects in use in this scene, specifically the Maiolica plates. As pointed out by Catherine Roach in her excellent book, Pictures Within Pictures, although Renaissance in origin, this type of ceramic was associated with a taste for the Gothic in this period, and amongst other names, they were known as Raphael ware. The inclusion of maiolica plates in this painting therefore acts as an efficient tool to signal both the medieval tone of the image, as well as visually write Raphael's name into the scene. This communication of the Pre-Raphaelite name in Isabella goes even further through the use of text within the image. For a very brief period, the PRB artists took to including the PRB initials after their names in their artist signatures. Here you can see Rossetti's signature and the group's initials at the bottom left of the Girlhood of Mary version that we saw earlier. In Millet's painting of Isabella, he too added the initials after his name and his signature, but unlike his fellow PRBs, Millet also incorporated the initials into the design of the scene itself, carving them into Isabella's stall. The reasoning for the integration of this detail into the composition may simply have been an attempt by the young artist to capture the public's eye and incite their curiosity as to the meaning behind these mysterious letters. I argue, however, that further meanings can be extrapolated from this artistic decision though. By including the initials as part of his main signature, Millet declares himself to be a member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and attributes the painting to the group's body of work. The positioning of these initials in the written signature immediately after the annotation of 1849 provides a clear temporal location for the painting in the mid-19th century. However, by integrating the initials into a piece of furniture being used in the scene, Millet places the PRB within the same temporal space as the medieval narrative playing out before the viewer. Through this act, Millet alerts us to a reading of the image that operates on the same plane as the group's temporally complex label, where, just like in the image of Eliza and Sarah Wyatt, we have this sense of simultaneous times playing out before us, of the past and the modern, as if a set of specific but disparate periods in time have been folded back on themselves to join together and create a single concurrent moment of multiple times, where the 14th century and 19th century, for example, are happening at once in a single image, or indeed in a single name, thus disturbing a traditional sense of linear chronological time and adding to our understanding of the group's revolt against the status quo. Now, it's worth saying that I don't think that the Pre-Raphaelite name can necessarily be read in all works of art produced by the PRB. However, the case studies looked at in this paper do appear to communicate a distinct self-conscious quality that appears to reference the group's understanding of periodized art history and their explicit interest in visually evoking the work that preceded those who devoutly followed Raphael. It's therefore my belief that through this greater alertness to the possible visualization of the label and its temporal complexity, we're able to find a new and engaging way of looking at Pre-Raphaelite artworks and the group's understanding of themselves in relation to their peers. Thank you very much.